Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Heal with Kat podcast. My name is Kat, and I am your host, and welcome to this week's episode with my guest, Liam Naden, who is a trailblazing coach who brings together cutting-edge neuroscience, psychology, and down-to-earth strategies to help people unlock their true potential, conquer challenges around success, and live a life of true purpose and balance. Liam went from being a millionaire to losing everything virtually overnight and becoming homeless, sleeping on his elderly mother's couch. But he bounced back to an amazing life of more success than he had before, and this time with more fulfillment. Now he's traveling the world, living on his own yachts and catamarans, and he is sailing through 15 countries in Europe. And at the time of us recording, you can literally hear the ocean hitting up against the boat. And at one point, he's kind of like moving with the boat too. So don't watch if you get seasick. But he's living an incredible life. And his secret to success is how he's learned how to work with his brain. Moving from survival into thriving, he gives us the neuroscience and the biology of how we can do the same thing. So you're going to love this episode if success is important to you, if going after your dreams is important to you, and if you love a good homeless to millionaire story and back. So enjoy, guys, with this week's episode. And as always, if you loved what you heard, don't forget to rate, subscribe, and review the episode. Make sure you screenshot your review or your comments on YouTube to me and send it to me on Instagram, because that's where I'm going to know where to find you if you win a free intuitive reading with me. Like I said, all you have to do is rate, subscribe, and review. I am so grateful for all of you who show up week after week after week, listening to the variety of guests that we have on this show as we continue to evolve the Heal with Kat podcast and inspire you on your psychosolic evolution. So with that, please help me welcome Liam Naden to the Heal with Kat podcast. I am so excited to have you here and to chat more about this amazing work that you're doing. So thank you for being here.
Thanks very much for having me, Kat. It's really exciting and an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, and we were just talking before we hit record. You're living on a catamaran in the middle of the Mediterranean or around the Mediterranean Sea right now.
Yeah, off the coast of Italy.
I mean, and this is your full-time gig. There's no home base. You are on the catamaran 24/7.
Yeah, I'm a complete nomad. I've been that way for about 15 years now, just mooching about.
I just love that. I admire that so much. I think the traumatized version of me that needs to have a home base, like somewhere on land. I love your ability to just embrace the open seas and follow your heart.
It probably ties in a little bit with what we're going to talk about, because a lot of my work is about what did we do when we were successful as human beings. And for most of our human history, we were nomads. And funnily enough, when we were nomads, we were a lot happier, a lot healthier, and a lot better. We thrived a lot more than we do today. So maybe there's something in that.
I think so. And your story is pretty incredible. You went from millionaire to homeless and then back to living an amazing life. Can you take us through that turning point, your life journey? What brought you through that, and what was your experience in that?
Sure. Really just going a little bit before that, I was like probably many people listening or watching, and I don't know about you, but certainly I used to be this really driven, I wanted success in my life. I wanted to be wealthy and have freedom and have a really great life. I didn't want to just settle for something ordinary. So I'd always been an entrepreneur. I'd had my own business. I've had 18 different businesses at last count over the years. And I built up a lot of success. I became a millionaire, as you mentioned just earlier. But one of the things I noticed was that I didn't just work hard and learn how to be good at business. I wanted to learn how success actually worked, how we achieve what we do in our life. What gives us the results we get. And I studied everything. I went to all sorts of workshops and seminars, about self-help, motivation, goal setting, rewiring your subconscious mind and beliefs, and, spirituality, meditation. I really was prepared to do anything, read any book, do any course, go to any seminar, if I thought it could help me understand how to be more successful. So I did a lot of stuff, and I had all of this information. I could quote all of the gurus. I'd read all the books. I had a lot of them in a really nice library that I had of books and tapes and recordings and courses. And I thought, I really understood what it took to be successful. But there was one particular day, and this actually was a real turning point, one of several turning points I've had in my journey of understanding more about why we're here and what we're supposed to be doing and how we can actually thrive rather than struggle. But this particular day, was at a stage in my life where I was just putting the finishing touches on my dream home. It was a brand new home being built, and I'd always had this idea I wanted this sort of a home. And there it was, in reality, the house of my dreams. Part of it was I wanted to have a music room. I'd always had this idea. I studied music when I was younger, and I always had this idea, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a house with a music room where I could play music and just be myself and lose myself in music? So here I was, I had a music room, I had the house. And I remember going in this particular sunny day and sitting down and looking out at the mountains because it was arranged with an incredible mountain view. And it was a really nice sunny day. I could feel what a warm day it was. But I remember sitting down and saying to myself and looking around and saying, this is it. I've done it. This was my dream home. I've made it. Here I am. I'm a millionaire. I've got 2 businesses that I run. I've got lots of money. I've got freedom. I've done some amazing things. So isn't this amazing? But instead of feeling that it was amazing, instead of feeling so happy and satisfied and grateful and had this sense of achievement, all of the things I've been working for, instead of feeling that, I absolutely felt almost the worst I'd ever felt in my life. I was sitting there and I remember it. I was shaking with stress. I was so miserable. I was almost in tears because the reality was, yes, I had all of this stuff. Yes, I'd achieved these goals, but there were so many other areas of my life that weren't working properly. It was like I couldn't get the whole picture. There were always problems. There was always stress, and I'd really bought into this idea that we've been taught so many times that problems are good. Stress is good. Overcoming your challenges is how you become successful, and it's the price you pay if you want to be successful. You have to learn not how to get rid of problems, but how to deal with adversity in your life. So I thought, well, that's all fine. And, I can understand that because it's the only explanation I can have as to why I'm not happy, even though I've got so much. But it didn't satisfy me. And as I sat down, I remember whether it was a voice or something said to me, maybe it'd be better if you just lost everything rather than lose your soul. Because really that's what it felt like. Here I was, I had so much, but it was like the life force was being drained out of me. That feeling when it's just everything is overwhelming? So anyway, somebody else said you have to be careful what you think about because literally within weeks, that's what happened. I did lose everything. The house went with the music room, my businesses went, my marriage went, everything I own went. I just ended up literally with not much more than the clothes on my back. And I had to move back in with my elderly mother and sleep on the sofa in the living room of her small apartment. It was the only place I knew to go. And this was such a massive change in my life to not only lose everything I had, but lose my sense of who I was. I thought I was this successful entrepreneur, this, businessman, a millionaire. And here I was, a nothing. Really, I had no money, I was in a strange town. So as I lay there every night trying to get to sleep, I was haunted by 2 questions. And they kept coming back and I kept trying to figure out the answers to these questions. And the first question was, why has this happened to me? Because it shouldn't have happened to me. I had all my goals lists. I'd done so many goal-setting workshops, and I knew how to visualize and get clear on what you want and write it all down and have, vision boards and maps and strategies and plans and use your subconscious mind to bring it forth to your physical reality and how to change your beliefs and work on all of these things. So I thought, how has this happened to me? Because I'm an expert on success. And this was never, as I said, this was never on my goals list. It's like something else has happened to make this happen that was beyond my control, which didn't make sense because I've spent my life learning how to be in control of your life, how to make sure this sort of thing doesn't happen, So I kept thinking, why has this happened to me? And the other question was, what do I do now? Because here I am, I'm in a strange town, I've got nothing, I don't know anybody, I've got no resources. What do I do? And the funny thing was I kept asking these 2 questions. Why has this happened to me? And what do I do now? And I just spent so much time analyzing and trying to figure it out. And I'd think of every tool that I had in my arsenal of success to try and figure out the answer to those 2 questions. Why it had happened and what to do next. And I finally found the answer to both those questions. And funnily enough, the answer to both questions was exactly the same. And people might be listening or thinking, well, what is the answer that you came up with? How did you figure out why it had happened to you? And what did you figure out you needed to do next? You know what the answer to both those questions was that I was convinced was right and turned out to be right? Why it had happened to me and what to do next? The answer is, I don't know. I have no idea why this has happened to me. and what to do next. And what I didn't realize is when I accepted that I didn't know the answer, or more specifically, the part of my brain that I was trying to use to figure out the answer, it didn't know the answer. When I finally accepted that, that's when everything changed. I didn't realize at the time, and we'll talk about it a bit, I actually shifted the way my brain was working, not on some sort of esoteric level, but on a biological level. I shifted the part of my brain that took charge. And that's when everything changed. And literally from that moment, things started to show up in my life. They weren't things I was chasing. They showed up. So a man came into my life and said, here's an opportunity to set up your own business again, because I know of your ability and your area of expertise to be perfect for you. It was a chance meeting, supposedly. We might say it's a chance meeting. But there I was 2 or 3 months later, and I had my own business. Now, I had no money. So how did it happen? You know? And so other things started to happen. I met somebody, my marriage fell apart, and then I met somebody else by chance who turned out to be an amazing person and became the person that I now still share my adventure with, traveling around the world as a sailing nomad. And then another business showed up and another business. And then we bought a motorhome in my home country, New Zealand, where I lived at the time. And we traveled all around New Zealand, managing our businesses, 2 businesses, remotely. And then we took a one-way ticket to Europe. And before we knew it, we bought a brand new yacht. And we were sailing it around Europe. And now, a few years later, we're on to our 4th yacht. And we've been through our 2nd motorhome. And all of these things were happening. And it was like dominoes were falling. And I thought, what is going on here? Because, and I remember another clear moment, I was in the Greek islands on one of the previous yachts. And again, it's the dream, isn't it, to be on your own yacht in the Greek islands, in a beautiful bay, to wake up in the morning, nobody else around, just go for a swim and then get out and, be thinking about how wonderful your life is. That's what was happening to me because I had 2 businesses that were running remotely. And here I was, things were going really well in my life. And then it suddenly hit me. 2 things hit me. The first was, this is it. I've made it. I'm doing it. But unlike the experience in the music room where I said, this is it, what I felt was completely different. I felt that I really was thriving. I was living my purpose. I was in the flow. I'd really got what I was looking for, that inner peace, that inner happiness. Sure, everything was working really well on the outside, and if it wasn't, I probably wouldn't have had so much inner peace. But I was thinking, this feels so different. This is so satisfying. It's almost like I'm in exactly the right place at the right time. I don't need to struggle for anything. It's all falling into place. And so I said to myself, I actually do have a problem here. How did this happen? Why did this happen? I didn't ask, what do I do now, like I had on the sofa, but I thought, why has this happened to me? Because the really strange thing was, in my former life, I thought at the time, I'd chased after every opportunity, set my goals. I'd worked really hard on getting clear on what I wanted and taking every effort I could possibly do to reach those goals. And, I'd learn everything. I'd go to courses. I'd talk to people, get coaching. I'd do whatever I could to improve myself to achieve my goals. And that ended up with me being miserable and ultimately losing everything. But this time around, I thought, this is so weird. I'm not setting any goals. It's like, I don't need to set goals. Things just keep showing up. Here's get this boat, Liam. Okay. Here's a business opportunity. Okay. Now, obviously, I was putting in effort, but it wasn't struggle. And I had no expectation. When something came along and it looked like a good idea, I just followed it. And the other thing that I didn't have was any particular problems. And I wasn't going after anything. I wasn't chasing opportunities. I wasn't going, what do I need to do now? How can I figure out how to make more money and reach my goal faster? And what do I need to learn? What book do I need to read? What course do I need to do? How can I improve myself? It was all happening to me. And I thought, my problem is I need to figure out what I'm doing differently because this is actually working. All of the stuff that I listened to with the gurus and gone to the seminars about, getting motivated and clear and working and strategizing and to reach and overcoming your obstacles, that hadn't worked, but something different was working. So that sent me on a mission to figure out what actually really works. How do we get the results we get in our life? Because we're all out there, most people are out there struggling, trying to achieve things, but it's not really working. Why are we all still struggling? Why haven't we achieved our goals? Why do we have all these goals and we hardly ever reach them? And if we do, a lot of the time we go, well, yeah, that's nice, but what's next? Or I'm still not really satisfied. Why is that? So that's really set me on this path of why we're here now. What I do now is share with people what I've learned about what actually works, or what I've found that works, as opposed to what doesn't work. And it's quite surprising.
Well, you have the track record to prove that it works. And I just love that story so much, because what I'm hearing you reflect is that, there's this old story or this old paradigm or pattern that success only comes from hustling, struggling, resilience, pushing yourself to your capacity, survival energy, which it's worked for a lot of people. It worked for my family. My family is a family of immigrants, came over from Lebanon, had no money, created a life for themselves in the US. And it was all about hustle, hustle, hustle. There were a lot of sacrifices with that. And I've had this internal conversation with myself around, okay, how do I create success in my life without killing myself for it? Sacrificing relationships, sacrificing my health. How do I shift the ancestral narrative that success has to be sacrifice all the time? And what I'm hearing you say is that really there's a secret in being and I don't know if you would use this word, but almost intuitive, in this place of just kind of following, like you said, following what feels good, going with the flow, staying open to receive. Are those things that you would attribute to, this idea of struggle-free success?
Absolutely. That's what it comes down to. Unfortunately, all of those words have with them meanings for people, or, they have a preconceived idea about what that means. And they actually think what it means is, well, if I just let go, I hope good things will happen. But they don't believe it will. They just hope. And obviously, and I was an avid Christian when I was brought up in a Christian family, and we were taught to pray if we wanted something. So a lot of people pray. But what is prayer for most people? It's not faith, it's hope. And it's the same with saying letting go. Most people don't let go. Most people don't get in the flow. What they do is they say they are, if they say they are, but what they're doing is saying, well, I hope this works. Subconsciously, they're still attached to something because they're afraid that it won't work. And the only reason we're afraid that something won't work is we don't understand how it works. So yes, we can have all these people tell us that's what you need to do. You need to let go. You need to get in the flow. But if you don't understand how that works, you're not going to do it. So what I've done is researched how and why it actually works and how we're designed to actually operate in this way. And when you understand that, it's not a question of faith anymore. I mean, you think about the problem with, people talk about they're afraid of doing things. 99% of what you do in your life on a day-by-day basis, you do out of faith. You believe your heart's going to keep beating, that you're going to keep breathing, that the sun's going to rise in the morning. You believe all of these things, that when you drive your motor car down the road, that everything coming the other way is not going to veer in front of you and hit you. So we actually live on faith, but we don't call it faith. We just say, well, that's just the way it is. I have an experience of it working, and I understand how it works. And it's the same when you understand what actually causes your life to flow and to work and things to happen in your life, and it's to do with biology of how your brain works. Then you just go, and this is what I do with when I help people, is when they get it, they go, well, why would I do it any other way? It makes total biological sense, not spiritual sense or psychological or, one of those ethereal sorts of things. This is a physical thing. This is a physical process. And I think that's the big difference. We can want to believe something, but we need to understand it and at least have an experience of it before we will.
I was just having this thought the other day, and I've shared this before on my podcast, that I work as an intuitive medium. I work in family constellation therapy. This work is very spiritual in nature. But I am starting to learn for myself that I become more spiritual when I am present in my body. The more work that I've done on understanding my brain, my body, it's the way that it works, the way it's developed, the way I hold on to trauma, the way that it's manifesting and blocking me spiritually. Like, I become more spiritual when I am present in here. And I always think about this idea that if we are all a spark of God inside of us, this higher power that created us, it is spiritual to be a human. What a gift that we were given all of these amazing tools inside of us to help us be our greatest potential. And sometimes it doesn't have to look spiritual. And that's why I love doing this podcast, because I love to describe it as the intersection between psychology and spirituality. It's the psychosolic evolution that we're all going through. I think you're alluding to this four-part brain model. If I'm understanding what we're kind of moving into here. You've created this four-part brain model that helps unlock potential. And I'm so interested if you could really take us through that and explain it to us, because it's actually what really made me want to have you on the show. Hey everyone, Kat popping in during the episode today to share that I have something so exciting to announce. I just launched a brand new series of meditations on Insight Timer, the world's #1 meditation app with over 31 million users. I'll be releasing 10 new meditations every month now through August. And the best part? They're totally free, including downloading the app. The guided meditations on Insight Timer aren't just about ancestral healing. They're designed to help you understand how inherited patterns, pain, fears, or choices show up in your everyday life, your relationships, your self-worth, parenting experiences, or even your health. Each one gently helps you untangle those threads so you can move forward feeling more grounded, clear, and connected. Just download the Insight Timer app, search my name, Kat Dow, or click the link in the show notes below. Make sure you're subscribed to my email newsletter to get updates every month on the new meditations coming to your phone soon. All right, let's get back to the episode.
Really? Okay, that's great. Well, here's the thing, with all of the talk about spirituality, and I agree, and just to make the point, when you are totally in your biology, that's when you are your most aware. That's when and that some people call it enlightenment, but it comes through the physical. It's not it's not about denying the physical. We are here in this physical experience to express an infinite intelligence in all its dimensions and in all our dimensions, and that includes spiritual and infinite awareness. But when you're not being yourself, when you're not using your biology the right way, when you're stressed, and you can't be spiritual when you're stressed. You can't express the fullness of yourself when you're stressed. So it's all to do with biology. And how I came to really look at this area was an area I'd never looked at before, and how I came up with the four-part brain model was to look at nature. And, traveling around, I live in nature. And what I see is something quite different to the way we as humans live. I don't see struggle and stress. You see perfection. Animals, everything, there's this biological efficiency, and it actually is I actually call it, I've come up with a name for it, the law of thriving. And the law of thriving says that every species, ecosystem, or individual is wired to be the best version of itself. And the reason for that is because that's what gives it the greatest chance for survival. It's the most efficient way that nature has found to ensure that life survives, is to make that living thing as good as it can be, to thrive, because that's the most efficient way to survive, is to thrive, is to be the best. So all of nature does this automatically, but we're the odd ones out, it seems. So are we any different, really? And most people say, oh, yes, we've got a much more intelligent brain and, we're much more sophisticated. We are the odd ones out in nature. But here's the funny thing. If you look at archaeology or anthropology, if you look at the history of mankind, what we discover is that for 97% of human history, which stretches back till 12,000 years ago, so we've been around for nearly 300,000 years as a species. So I'm just talking about the biology of humans, okay? But for 97% of that time, we actually lived in total harmony with nature. And we have this idea of those poor primitive cavemen who are all struggling and living brutal, miserable lives and didn't have enough food. It turns out the opposite. All the evidence shows that we were far healthier then than now. All of these diseases we have today didn't exist until 12,000 years ago. We were taller than we are now. Our bones were stronger. We had perfect teeth. This is the whole what humanity was like. And here's the other interesting thing. There's no evidence of any war, of any conflict between humans. All of these things, the disease, the conflict, the unhappiness, all came after this big shift that happened 12,000 years ago. And so when you really think about that, you realize our biological design, if something worked for 97% of the time, it's obviously, and it worked, and then it stopped working when something changed, then obviously that design is who we're supposed to be. That's how we're supposed to operate. That's how we reach our highest potential. It's not about doing what we're doing today, which is all dysfunctional and making us an exception in humanity. So this brought me to the brain, to realize the brain is the machine. The brain is the mechanism that we used in a different way until 12,000 years ago. That was the big shift, was how we used our brain. And that we switched away from the part I call the thriving brain, which is a physical location in your brain, and it manages your intuition, your awareness, your perceptions, your higher perceptions, your creativity, the inner voice within you that tells you what you should do that we always ignore, the motivation. In other words, when you feel inspired and when you're in the flow, this is the part of your brain that you're using. This is what I call the thriving brain. And that's the way you're supposed to be all the time. Those moments that you have of feeling, life's going well, I'm feeling really good, or I feel this love coming from me, or I just feel like I'm in the right place. Those good feelings, that's our biological natural state, because that's the state that gives us the greatest chance for survival. That's when we do all the good things, and that's when we put the least amount of pressure and stress on our body so that we survive longer. That's the way we're supposed to live. But we don't live like that anymore because we no longer operate from that part of the brain, because 12,000 years ago, something happened that stopped us from operating from that part of the brain. And instead, we activated another part of the brain, which causes all of the problems in our life. So there are actually 4 parts to your brain. The first one I mentioned, the thriving brain. This is your natural state of being when you're using this part of your brain. There's also the thinking part of your brain and the emotional part of your brain and what I call the survival part of your brain. So what actually happened? Do you want to know what happened 12,000?
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. What happened?
Well, what actually happened, and this is actually the subject of a book I'm writing at the moment, which is coming out in a few months' time, The Big Shift, what actually happened. And more importantly, not what happened, but also why it happened, and how can we undo it? How can we go back to using our brain the right way? How can we, in the modern world, not go back to being a caveman living on a rock or being a nomad like me, but how can we go back to using our brain the way it's naturally designed? Because that's all you need to do. You don't need to do all this stuff about getting better in various areas and improve yourself. You just need to realize you're using the machine the wrong way. I mean, imagine, just as a little bit of an example, imagine you're a pygmy or a caveman and you come out of the forest and you've never seen a motor car before, but there's one sitting there. And you say to this man, "What is that?" And he said, "It's a machine called a motor car." And you say, "Well, what does that do?" They say, "Well, it's really interesting. It's a machine that's designed only for one thing, really, but it does it really well. It'll take you from anywhere you want to go. From where you are right now to anywhere you want to go." You think, "Wow, that's amazing." And they say, "Yeah, it's really, it's really comfortable and enjoyable, a fun thing." So he goes away and you look at this motor car and you think, "I wonder how it works." And you see there's wheels on it. You think, "Well, that's a little bit like the wheels on my cart back in the village." So you get behind the motor car and you put all your energy into trying to push the car along. You don't know how it works, but you think maybe this is how it works. And you put in all of this energy and what's happening? Nothing. You're not getting anywhere. You're getting tired and you think, "Well, this is really difficult. I'm putting all this energy. It must be that I'm not putting enough energy in, so I'll try harder." So you push it even harder. And then you say, "The problem really is me. I'm not motivated enough. I'm not strong enough. I need to go and build up my muscles or maybe get some better footwear to get more traction on the ground. But something about me that's the reason why it's not working and why it's so hard." And then, of course, the man comes out and says, "What on earth are you doing? Why are you making it so hard for yourself? That's not how it works. It's not designed to be difficult. It's designed to be easy. It's designed to be fun. It's designed to do its job for you to get what you want." So then he shows you just hop in the seat and you press all the levers and buttons and you practice it a bit because you don't know how it works. And after a while, it's so obvious and so easy. And you think, "Why did I ever struggle before?" It's all because you didn't understand how it actually worked. And you thought the problem was you. And you thought you needed to, learn something new or develop a skill. You've got it all within you. This is how the brain works. We did this for 97%, nearly 300,000 years. It worked perfectly. We were healthy, happy. It all just worked. But what we did was we used our thriving brain. We didn't use the other parts of our brain because the other parts of the brain have got a different function. They're not there to make you thrive. So here's the magic secret about what we did differently. What happened to humanity that made us go like that? And all the evidence shows the health went down, the lifespan went down really quickly when all of this happened. What we actually did was we invented agriculture. And all of a sudden, we were eating foods that weren't suited for us. And we were doing things that were a lot of hard work. Before that, we were nomadic hunters and food was abundant and we would just take the food. We didn't have to plan for the future and plant crops. So and we only worked a few hours a day just catching the food we needed. We didn't have to toil the fields for hours, from dawn till dusk to have enough food for next year. We didn't have that. And we went from this nomadic life to, obviously, if we've got agriculture, you have to settle down. You have to be in one place. You have to have a town or a village or this lifestyle where you're going to be in the same place in a year's time when the crops happen. And when we did that, when we created agriculture and started eating the wrong foods and started living in the wrong way, which was, unhealthy, we were all together, and that created disease and conflict and all those sorts of things. Because the other thing we needed rules, we needed hierarchy, we needed someone to tell us what to do, we needed to organize things. So we started to develop the social structure which created conflict. And we needed to make sure we had enough, and we needed to either be told what to do or have someone tell us what to do. So all this organization, which hadn't been there, happened before. And we accepted a life that was far worse than it had been before. And what I started to think about was, why did we do that? Why did we choose a life? Because remember, if the brain is designed to make sure that we thrive, that we do all the right things, that the path of least resistance, the law of least resistance is a law of nature. Everything operates with optimum efficiency. The water doesn't run down the stream and then stop at a rock and then try and fight its way through. It just goes around it. Nature has spent millions of years becoming super efficient at finding the best way to do everything with the least amount of energy that's used. So why did we choose a life of struggle? Why did we accept this life when our brain should have been saying, this is the wrong thing to do? You shouldn't sit down and eat the wrong foods. You shouldn't set up structures that create conflict between people and create more disease and unhappiness and a sense that you don't have enough and they've got more than you, and all the wars and all these things. All of these things were unknown before then. So why did we do that? Because agriculture wasn't the reason why we declined, nor was towns and cities and being settled. They were the instrument by which we declined. But you know why we did that? Why we chose this miserable existence when we suddenly didn't have enough food and life was a lot harder? It's because we invented or created or given, or whatever you like to call it, language. We never had language before that. We never had words. And people say, well, language is good, isn't it? You can figure all this stuff out. But here's what language does. And I'm not suggesting we go back to, in my book talks about this, but it's not about going back to not having language, but it's understanding there's a way to use language or be used by it. But the problem is, when you go from a state of not having language to having language, you go from a state of awareness and direct connection with your environment. So you look at yourself, or you look at a hand, or you look at a tree, and you don't say, that's a tree. You just know what it is. You have this direct connection with all of your environment and with yourself. But when you start labeling things, you create a separation, and you start to say, that's a tree, and that's another tree, and this is me. So you've got all these labels for things. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
You have all these labels, and that's creating separation. It's creating a sense that you are separate from your environment, from your world, from your spirituality as well. And that has some benefits, but the downside with that, what that also does is it gave us the ability to tell stories. And you think, well, the stories, that's good, isn't it? But what happens when you tell stories is that your brain, instead of being your thriving instinctive brain, which just knows automatically the right thing to do in every moment to make sure that you thrive, it's tapped into this infinite intelligence that's wired to the rest of nature. All of a sudden, you're creating stories. You've invented something that never existed before, which is the future. So instead of instinctively knowing that everything is going to work for you, you start creating these stories, and you start saying things like, well, I've got enough food now, but maybe I won't have enough food in the future. I can see a picture in my head of a scene where I don't have enough food. Maybe somebody's going to come and take my food from me now. So when we did that, we moved from using our thriving brain to using our thinking brain and our survival brain. And we came up with all of these stories about the future that included all of the threats and dangers, because the survival brain is designed to, another part of the brain is designed to protect you from threats and dangers. And it's perfect about protecting you from immediate threats and dangers, which is the lion jumps out from behind a rock and is going to eat you. So we do this fight, flight, freeze thing, and we react to it, and you jump out of the way, or you run away, or you shout for help, or you fight, or whatever. That's the survival brain kicking in with this biological instinct to protect you from an immediate danger. But when we started creating stories through language, we created all these imaginary dangers. So suddenly the survival brain wasn't just trying to deal with the lion jumping out of the rock instinctively. It was having these pictures about a lion might jump out of a rock, but from behind a rock. You might be hungry. You might not have enough food. All of these stories. And that overloaded the brain, and it got it to do something it was never designed to do. We are not designed to be able to solve imaginary problems, because they don't exist. The future doesn't exist. But we had to create what we convinced ourselves was my future, if I don't sacrifice, or I need to sacrifice in the present, because if I don't, the future might be worse than it is now. So we were prepared to toil away in the fields, growing food that didn't suit us, getting sick, getting disease from eating the wrong food and living a lifestyle that we weren't suited to. We were prepared to do all of that because our brain was continually saying, if you don't, there's all of these dangers that are going to come at you if you don't do. And the survival brain, the part that's designed to deal with threats, it can't see that. It doesn't have a sense of time. It can't see a threat either being in the future or in the present. It's all just there. It sees it as being in the present. So we gave it an impossible task, which is to solve every problem that you have in your life and potential problem. And when you do that, then you can be happy. Then you can relax. Because what happens is you shut down your thriving brain when you're doing all of this. But we won't let the thriving brain take over until we've solved every problem in life, both real and potential, all through all these stories that we've created. So we created this impossible situation, and all we could do is do what we do to this day. We live in dysfunction. We live with all these stresses. A lot of the time we're stressed, we don't even know why. Why are we unhappy when we've got the most stuff, the greatest comforts in human history? We should be absolutely delirious, but it's because we're telling these stories all the time. We're using our thinking brain and our survival brain who are keeping us stuck, trying to solve imaginary problems. So the same, imagine in a relationship, you think, my relationship's not going too well. Well, actually, it's not really the relationship. It's all the stories you're telling about it. So you have an argument with your husband or your wife. Why do you shout at them? Because you think that a problem could happen if you don't fix this argument right here, right now, that you need to win the argument because if you don't, you're going to end up with more problems down the track. So what it's kept us in this trap of is telling stories all the time, trying to figure stuff out, trying to use language, and it keeps us separated from actual experience of life. So we're not experiencing life. What we're doing is we're telling stories about life all of the time. And, maybe people just think about how much of thought is going on. And, a lot of this we're so used to doing it, we're not even aware we're doing it, but we're constantly telling ourselves stories. So we're not really interacting on this is where mindfulness and all of these, meditation, they're all designed to try and take you out of this storyland into actually experiencing who you are, experiencing reality, experiencing your environment. And when you do that, it's been called enlightenment, but enlightenment is nothing more than operating naturally, thriving by direct connection through instinct with who we really are.
Wow. Wow. I would love to read your book because I feel like this is a huge conversation. It really bleeds into this thought that I've had lately where we've never been more hyper independent in our society and more separated. I think that's why you see a lot of people wanting to buy land and just go out, live out in the middle of nowhere and to renounce, materialism and capitalism. And I mean, it's like from so many different angles especially in the Western world, so many people are trying to find what you're talking about, that sense of reconnecting to their natural being, that presence, that natural human way of operating. And there's, everyone thinks that they have like the right way to do it, but it's like to me, it's to each to the own person of how they want to get, find that. I also think that we've never been more traumatized as a society. We've never had more unprocessed trauma in our own lives and ancestrally that we don't realize that those traumas that we experience are creating the stories of our lives. And there's people like me and you and others out there who are trying to show people, hey, that's not your truth. That's the illusion of who you are. These things did happen to you. We're not saying that these traumas are an illusion, but that whatever it's made you think about yourself or about the world, it may not be true. And we should challenge that and kind of see if there's something underneath that in you that's more aligned with who you're meant to be in this life. So I really think when you take it down to the biological level, you're able to really understand the development of human society and how we continue to just move farther and farther away from this idea of, like, when you're talking, I think of, and this is going to sound silly to some people, but I love it, is when I go hiking out in Boulder and I go in the presence with all these trees, just placing your hand on a tree and just being with the energy of something so much bigger and so much more present than you. You really do have a spiritual experience with it. And to your point, because there's not about labeling things to, I'm a person and this is a tree. It's that natural oneness that we were created with, that kind of God spark of that oneness that we don't always feel all the time. And I just think that as a society, we're trying so hard to fit in and belong and find our place and who are our people and who's going to love us and accept us. And I think sometimes that journey brings us farther and farther away from the truth.
Unfortunately, what most people are doing, and I've done a lot of marriage and relationship coaching. It's a big part of, it's where I started with this work, really. And I kept trying to figure out, why is it that people put all this effort into counseling and everything else, and they never really make any progress? And what I realize, it's the same thing we're talking about, is that what people don't realize is they're trying to find an answer through stories. But stories are what keeps you separate. You can come up with a better story. You can come up with all sorts of information, and you can even try and change the story. But just having the story is very different to experiencing life. Having a story about your life is the problem. So you can go anywhere you like. You can go to the forest, and become a nomad, or, go and escape from society. But if you don't escape from the stories, if you don't escape from your narrative that is telling you, labeling you about your life, and blocking you from actually experiencing your life, you're never going to find what you're really looking for, which is that inner peace. So that's where we need to look. And unfortunately, what society is doing is we're doing more stories, more stuff, more information. Everything's instant, and I need to learn and find out more. We go further and further off track. And why don't we stop and think, doing more of what I'm doing, is that really getting me anywhere? Is it getting our society anywhere? Is there any light at the end of the tunnel? Are we getting any healthier or any better or anything like that? If we're not, then maybe there's a fundamental problem with where we're actually looking. And that's, as I say, this is where this dysfunction comes from. A really good example you mentioned about, going out and being in nature. And what is it that really happens when you do that? You can't describe it, can you? You just feel it. You don't know what it is, but you don't just feel, you feel something that, as you say, is much bigger than you, but you also feel that your true self is somehow connected. Who you really are is somehow connected to this bigger experience. But you can't explain it in words. Another really good example of that is love. How many people throughout history have tried to explain, describe, tell us, give an explanation for what love is? There's been every great artist, musicians, songs, books, everybody has tried to define what love is. But if someone asks you, what is love? None of us have the answer. Isn't that weird? It's the one thing we're chasing to try and find out what it is. None of us know what it is. None of us can describe it with words, but we all know what it feels like. We all have had the experience of love, and we might try and describe it, but we know that all our descriptions are not what love is. But we can't describe it accurately, but we just know on a different level. And that's our instinctual, thriving brain. That's what love is. So we need to get away from this idea that being able to explain, that we can explain something, that we can tell a story about something, whether it's about our life, all that does is keep us separation. It's not the experience, you know?
Yeah, it makes me think of two things. The first thing is when I'm doing mediumship and somebody's loved one comes through and they give me this feeling of so much love. It makes me cry. And I'm trying to explain to the client, oh my goodness, they're just flooding me with so much love. And I hope that you're feeling this. And the other person every single time starts to cry, and there's no words that we're exchanging because they feel that love coming through this experience rather than, and in the beginning of mediumship, it was very hard for me to explain that. I wanted to put words to this experience that we're all having, and I couldn't. Now, my wisdom is mention that this is happening and just hold space for the energy that's coming through so it can be felt. So I love that example. And then the second thing it made me think of is that every single person that I have worked with in family constellation therapy for the 4 years that I've been doing it, I have seen that almost every single person has a wound of not being enough. And I think that also fuels our need to do more and get more because nothing is ever enough. And for the listener who's a part of the community, you'll know I talk a lot about this within the mother wound. We get our sense of security and safety and that we're enough in this world from our mothers. And so we could have a whole other conversation about this larger ancestral or, evolutionary mother wound. But yeah, it just makes me think of this wound that we all have, that we all don't feel like we're enough and we keep chasing that. But yet, when I'm standing there in the mountains, in this silence, there's no stimulation whatsoever, and I'm present with the ground, the trees, the birds, I've never felt more enough because there's nothing to compare to. It just is. We're all existing in this beingness. So it's just a beautiful reminder. Your work is such a beautiful reminder of how far we have strived away from ourselves and the work that sometimes it takes spiritually and biologically to come back into that sense of being, that we're enough, we are love, that we can be in tune, we can thrive, and we don't have to be in our thinking, logical survival brain all the time.
Well, the good thing is it's all very explainable by biology. What is this thing, you talk about, we all have this feeling that we're not enough. Why do we have that feeling? Why do we have that constant drive to have more? Because we have this constant feeling that we don't have enough and we're not enough, this dissatisfaction with life. That's not thriving. That's not experiencing what you mentioned, the opposite, which is having this state of, I am enough, I have this peace. We might only feel that when we're out in nature, and not even all the time when we're out in nature. So what's the difference? The only difference is which part of your brain you're using. Because your thinking brain, the part that processes information, and your survival brain, the part that's designed to protect you from dangers, it's creating these stories. When you use those dominant as the predominant way you operate your brain, it's going to keep telling you stories. You don't have enough. There's danger out there. Yes, you're happy. You could be happy now, but if you don't put in some more work, there could be another threat next week, next month. You might not be happy then. Someone might take all your money. You might not have enough to be satisfied and do the things you want to do. You might not reach your goals. You might look back with regrets. So, and that part of your brain, it's there to look out for danger and threats. That's its sole purpose. So it's doing its job, but you're overloading it with all these imaginary scenes. For 97% of the time when it worked perfectly, it was perfect at doing the job it was built for, which is to protect you from an immediate threat. If something comes along into your space, recognizes it in the present, and it deals with it. But it can't deal with imaginary threats, the imaginary threats that come through the stories that you developed when you started to label things through words. So that's why you're always going to stay stuck. The only way to get free is to figure out a way to shut those parts of your brain down and allow the thriving brain to take charge again, which is the way you're naturally and biologically designed to do. And when it does that, when you take control of your stories, of your brain and the way it works, and then you switch to the thriving brain, back to my story when I was on the sofa and I just said, I don't know the answer, I give up. I stopped the analysis and I'd stopped the future stories of saying all these bad things are going to happen to you if you don't try and figure out and force, earn and figure out a way to earn some money and get off the sofa and, get your life back on track. You need to do all these things. So when I gave up all those stories, I didn't realize at the time, but that's what I actually did, was I said to my thinking brain and my survival brain, that's it. You can't help me. Thank you very much. If there's a real threat or if I need to know something in the present, I'll deal with it. My brain will deal with it. In the meantime, I'm just going to see this other part, which is not about your thoughts. Why do we get these inspirational ideas? If you ask any creative person, I quite enjoy watching interviews with songwriters of really famous songs. And they say to them, where did you get the idea? Where did the music come from for that? And this goes to the beginning of music, or recorded music, in terms of asking people this question. Where did the idea come from for that? And they all say the same thing. They say, I don't know. It just came to me out of somewhere. I don't know how it happened. Out of the blue. It was a famous songwriter wrote one of the standard pop songs of the 60s, I think. And they said to him, it's the most incredible song. It's still really popular today. How did you write that song? And he said, it wasn't there one moment and the next moment it was there. I don't know. This is our natural thriving part. This is the part that is going to bring us all the right ideas. It's going to get us to do the right things. It's going to get us to see the right opportunities. That's what it's designed to do. But you need to stop this other part interfering, trying to figure it out, worrying about it. All of these endless stories of what's the bad things that are likely to happen to you in the future, which it thinks are happening right now, that keep you in the state of fear, anxiety, frustration, anger, bitterness, stuck with all, and you think, I don't want to feel this way. Why am I feeling this way? And you don't realize your brain is trying to do a job it was never designed to do. You need to try and, find a way to stop that happening. And that's what I've developed as a way to do that.
Yeah, well, it makes me think of how, I'm like the token overhealer as like a student of life. I feel like I've overdone a lot of the healing modalities. If there's a problem, I'm going to go into and I've learned after 10 years of this that now I've gotten to a place where it's not about, I still show up and do my work. Like I'm still willing to go into the brain. I'm doing EMDR, I'm doing brain spotting, like I'm understanding the brain and I'm going into it to stop these stories. But there is almost a pattern now in the healing world of doing it too much. You can do something too much. You can go into the brain too much. What I'm hearing you say is that there's like a nice healthy balance between like go into the stories, address them, like figure out the root of them, but also like know that your natural state of receiving and being in the flow of life is in this thriving brain. And it makes me think, somebody who's listening to this who's feeling really stuck right now, they may resonate with your story, my story, everything about it. Wherever they are in their life, what's one thing, maybe the most simplest way, one thing they can do right now to start learning how to move into their thriving brain if their logical thinking brain is like on high alert?
Well, I think the most important thing, it's a little bit like the one, if I was a nutritionist and someone said to me, I'm really overweight, I'm really unhealthy, what's the one thing I need to do to get healthy? And I could tell you quite easily, everyone knows, stop eating the wrong foods, eat the right foods and do some exercise. That's it. It's not complicated, but people don't do that, do they? And why don't they do that? Because they don't understand how that really works, and they don't understand a way to do it that's not so difficult. They don't understand the things that are keeping them addicted to the wrong foods. They don't know how to deal with that and overcome their addictions. And they keep saying, well, I'm on this diet, but I'm looking forward to the end of the diet so I can go back to all the things I'm addicted to that are really bad for me. So I think the important thing, and we're in this society now where we're so stuck with our stories, everything's got to be instant. We have instant access to every bit of information you could possibly imagine. We don't wait for the TV show on a Friday night at 7:00 and we all sit down and watch it. We can watch anything anytime. So we have this very short attention span, gratification need to have a quick fix to everything. But it's not actually how anything works. So rather than a quick fix, because I'll tell you the simple answer, what's something they could do now? Stop using your thinking brain to activate your survival brain to keep you in a state of fear, stress, worry, and anxiety, so that you allow your thriving brain to actually take control and act from instinct. Stop thinking the stories again, and what you're telling yourself is going to help. That's the reality of how your brain works. But of course, people say, well, that doesn't sound very easy to do. It's not easy to do. Well, it's a lot easier when you know how to do it, of course, but the reason it's not easy to do is you've spent a lifetime with the wrong habits and the wrong beliefs and everything you've been told about your life. Life is hard. You have to struggle. And all deference to your parents. Of course, we have examples where that's happened for people. But, that's not naturally, biologically, the way we're designed to live. Our brain is a machine that's originally was designed to make sure life wasn't a struggle. And it wasn't a struggle. We've created this world that's full of struggle because we're using our brain in an incorrect way. So I think the most important thing, if it was what advice I'd give, was to say, start to understand this stuff. It's like, another example, say the motor car I mentioned. Imagine, I don't know if you've got children, you look far too young to have children, but imagine if,
Not as
you
young
have
as I look.
a 10-year-old. Yeah, true. Same with me. But imagine you have a 10-year-old boy who comes to you and says, Dad or Mum, can I please borrow the car because a friend's got a party, or I'd like to go on a trip and visit a friend who's 100 miles away. Can I borrow the car tonight? And you say, but hang on, you don't know how to drive it. And so, okay, well, I don't know how to drive it, and I'll learn to drive it one day and I'll do what I need to do. But just give me a quick tip on how to drive it so I can just get it to that one place that I want to go to tonight. And so that's not the way it works. You have to learn how it works. But the great thing is, and I hope I've given a bit of a taste of this, is when you do understand it, and often it doesn't take a lot. It just, when you finally get it, that's when everything changes. When you finally understand how your brain actually works and how your brain is really your connection to infinite intelligence. God, infinite intelligence, whatever you want to call it, it can only experience itself through you, through the physical. That's why you've been created, because if you're everything, if you're infinite, you can't experience yourself. You have to have something else that you or not something else, part of you needs to come into physical form. So you're here for infinite intelligence to be able to express itself. And that means express itself well. It doesn't mean struggle and dysfunction. It means thriving. It means it's all of nature is set up this way. So when you get that and you say the only thing blocking me from that thriving state, which how much more proof do you need that 97% of human history, this is the way we lived and things were far better. When you get that, then you just say, well, I just need to learn a little bit about how this works. And when I get that, then I have an experience of it working. But telling more stories and learning more information and staying stuck in the words, the labels, which keep you separate from the experience of who you are, that's not going to help. But when you finally cross that bridge through some understanding and experience it, you go, wow, this is how it works. And then something happens in your life that previously would say, well, a good thing. Previously, you'd say, oh, that was coincidence or a fluke or good luck. But then you see how life's actually working to bring to you and make sure that the right things happen for you with the least amount of resistance, the greatest amount of efficiency, the amount of energy expended, all biological principles that everything runs on. When you start to get an experience of that and you work with it more or you get more experience, you get to the stage where you're saying, I'm not surprised anymore. That is how it works. That is It's not a question of faith or belief or expecting good things. You don't even think about it. Your life flows. That's what we're here to do. Does that answer the question?
No, absolutely. This is such an inspiring conversation for me, and I hope for the listener as well, because it really just reminds us that this is my take. I don't know how you feel about this, but for me, I'm feeling we are designed by this higher power, by God, to be these intelligent beings, to be in connection with everything and everyone around us. And yet the human struggle of how are we getting in the way of that? And, when we talk about reconnecting with our soul, our authenticity, this is a huge biological piece of that. So I really want to thank you for so much of your wisdom and the work that you've done on yourself to be able to share that with me and the community today. And I love the psychological, scientific part as much as I love the spiritual part. So this is such a resonant conversation. You're living on a yacht now. You're living this nomadic life, but how can people find you and connect with you and learn more about your work?
Well, actually, everything's just on my website, liamnaden.com. And, if anyone wants to reach out, if anyone's got any questions, I'd love to hear from people. Go to my website, or if you've just got a question, just send me an email at liamnaden@gmail.com. And if I can help in any way to help you, understand more and get away from the stories that are haunting you in your life and stopping you and keeping you stuck, we shouldn't be, life's supposed to be an adventure. It is for the rest of nature. It's not supposed to be difficult. We don't see trees struggling to grow if they're in the right soil. They just grow. They become a tree. Our bodies just grow. Everything just happens in the most efficient way possible. We're not supposed to struggle. So if I can help anybody to come to that awareness, and the way we do that is by shifting the way we use our brain. And I've got, practices, if you like, to create new habits around and to get rid of all these old habits, just like we've been eating all the wrong food and it's made us sick and overweight. And when we eat the right food, things are a lot easier. Then it's the same with our mental food or with our brain. The way, when you use it the right way, everything becomes a lot easier. It's not supposed to be difficult. That's one of the secrets of life. It's not supposed to be hard. It's not difficult anywhere else.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, that's a bigger conversation we could keep having, I'm sure. But thank you so much for being on the Heal with Kat podcast and being such a wonderful guest. And everybody, please drop in the comments below or leave us a review on what you're taking away from this episode this week, something that you really were inspired by. And don't forget to rate and subscribe and review the podcast. You can screenshot it and send it to me on Instagram, as I'm giving away a free intuitive reading to anybody who rates, subscribes, and reviews the podcast. So with that, everyone, thanks for joining this week. Liam, thank you so much for joining me.